Recording is starting.
Backup is rolling.
Sergeant Lugo.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Public Safety. At this time, would all panelists please turn on your videos? Instruction, please place electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair Adams, we are ready to begin.
Good morning, and thank you for joining today's virtual hearing. I'm Councilmember Adrienne Adams, Chair of the Committee on Public Safety. I'd like to acknowledge that we have been joined by my colleagues this morning, Council Members Miller, Towers, and Menchaca. I'm sure that more are on the way. We're here to discuss the process of reopening the criminal courts. And today's hearing is going to be a little different from a typical oversight hearing. But before we begin, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for Justin Wallace of Far Rockaway, who was senselessly gunned down a few weeks ago, just days before his 11th birthday. Thank you. While there are a number of issues that concern us about how the court closures have impacted everyone involved in the criminal justice system, I have to begin by stating the simple fact that the problems that we're addressing today are nobody's fault. Slowing the spread of COVID-19 unfortunately required drastic measures, and anyone who had ever set foot in one of our courthouses before the pandemic knows full well that social distancing was simply impossible. So I'll acknowledge that the courts had to be closed, but there were, of course, tremendous consequences. Without juries and grand juries, the case backlog grew, and the amount of time people spent at Rikers increased, regardless of their guilt or innocence. Instead of challenging the decisions that were made, we're here today to take stock of where we are now and to see how we can help move forward. To highlight the problems the court system has faced, the extent of the backlog, the consequences to incarcerated individuals of the suspension of grand juries and the lack of jury trials, the rising jail population, and the challenges that the court system faces in returning to normal business, or at least what the new normal will be. I want to note that we are unfortunately not going to hear from OCA today. Instead, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, which has been coordinating this effort amongst the various stakeholders, will provide us and the public with a detailed update of where we are today and what the challenges are that lie ahead. I want to sincerely thank MOCJ for being here today and for their efforts during the pandemic to monitor the situation and coordinate between multiple city agencies and our defender community under extremely difficult circumstances, and especially for their work advocating for as many people as possible to be released from the city jails safely. Those efforts saved lives, and I commend you, Director Solar, and your entire staff for everything you did during the last 15 months to minimize the impact of COVID-19 on our fellow New Yorkers, whether there were people who were incarcerated, correction officers, medical staff, or anyone else who was most at risk in our jails. I can assure you that we're not here to criticize, but to raise awareness and to learn what we can do to help. After all, the ramifications of closing the courts has directly threatened some of our most significant criminal justice reform achievements, like bail reform, the expansion of supervised release, and perhaps most importantly of all, the plan to close Rikers Island. With that, I look forward to hearing what you can tell us about the current state of the courts, how our recent reform efforts have been impacted, and what we can do to support you going forward. I will now turn it over to our moderator, Committee Counsel Daniel Addis, to go over some procedural items.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Daniel Addis, Counsel to the Committee on Public Safety of the New York City Council. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be muted until you are called on to testify, at which point you will be unmuted by the host. I will be calling on panelists to testify. If council members would like to ask a question of the administration or a specific panelist, please use the Zoom raise hand function and I will call on you in order. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, which includes the time it takes to answer questions. All hearing participants should submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. That's testimony@council.nyc.gov if you have not already done so. Members of the public may also submit written testimony. The deadline for written testimony is 72 hours after the hearing. The first panel will include members of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. We will then hear from Richmond County District Attorney Michael McMahon, followed by members of the public. To the first panel, before I call on you to testify, I will administer the oath. I will read the oath and call on each of you to affirm. Can we have Mr. Soler and Ms. Logan unmuted? And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes, I do.
I do.
Thank you, Soler, and thank you, Ms. Logan. And you may begin your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Adams and members of the Committee on Public Safety. My name is Marcus Soler, and I am the Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. I'm joined here today by Deanna Logan, General Counsel and Deputy Director for Crime Strategies. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Chair Adams. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about MACJ's role and the city's role in coordinating the expansion of in-person operations for the city's criminal court system. MACJ, as you know, advises the mayor on criminal justice policy and runs a number of programs and justice initiatives from the crisis management system, and you know very well, to alternatives to incarceration and supervised release, which you have already mentioned. We work with law enforcement, city agencies, service providers, non-for-profits, foundations, and the public to implement effective strategies that make the city safer, fairer, and within a smaller criminal justice footprint while improving system coordination. The courts are critical to a fully functioning justice system and are necessary to achieve the goals of improving public safety, reducing unnecessary enforcement and incarceration, and promoting fairness. For a large system such as New York City's system to operate well, multiple steps might take place in a highly coordinated way. The police must put the evidence together, building strong cases and arrest suspects. Prosecutors must arraign cases, appear before the grand jury to establish probable cause, and try defendants upon indictment. Defendants might represent those who are accused at all stages. Jurors must determine guilt if the case goes to trial, and the courts must secure appropriate dispositions and sentences for people convicted of a crime. This whole process might happen with some degree of efficiency, speed, and above all, finality. All stages of the process I just described are important, but no stage is more important than the adjudicative finding step resulting in a determination of guilt or innocence. The pandemic has made it clear adjudication drives the process. If we cannot get cases to conclusion, the administration of the justice system slows down significantly. To make sure that the system doesn't freeze or come to a halt, all participants in the system must work in close coordination to reach finality on case dispositions. The system only works if trials are a possibility, even as we know trials are only 5% of all cases resolved each year or less. Since the summer of 2020, the city has been calling for the full reopening of the courts, including the convening of more grand juries, addressing the backlog and prioritization of cases involving gun violence, and the scheduling of trials. There are important functions of the justice system that were impacted for too long. In the last 2 months, we have experienced notable increases in court activity. These are positive signs. We now need the courts and all actors, including the city, to fully reach pre-pandemic capacity, and the city is doing and will continue to do everything possible to support that work. From the start of the pandemic, the city has worked with the courts, the district attorneys, the defenders, and other partners to facilitate the continued operation of the essential functions of the criminal justice system and bring cases to conclusion. Last year, in March 2020, as in-person operations decreased due to the pandemic's health mandates, OCA, MACJ, and other partners worked together around the clock to implement virtual essential operations. Within 2 weeks, arraignments and other court appearances were entirely virtual, while court employees continued to report to the courthouse to perform the essential tasks that help to maintain the system. Throughout the pandemic, as guidelines and requirements shifted as a result of the dynamic nature of the pandemic and the COVID emergency that we face, in-person operations from grand juries to trials resumed at a reduced capacity. MACJ worked with the various court actors to coordinate COVID-19 mitigation measures at each phase of the public health emergency. My office partnered with DCAS and OCA to survey the ventilation capacity of the courthouses. In coordination with OCA, DCAS provided portable air filtration units for spaces where ventilation was limited, installed plexiglass in all areas that require close interaction, implemented enhanced cleaning measures through the buildings, and installed COVID-19 best practices signage, such as physical distancing, face coverings, and hand washing in public areas. MACJ worked with the Department of Health and Mental Health to clarify the screening guidelines and processes for reporting and handling contact tracing. MACJ also helped to plan for the resumption of some in-person operations, including grand juries to deliberate on felony indictments, and some criminal jury trials. In order to mitigate the risk of exposure to and transmission of COVID-19, the city obtained at-home COVID-19 tests for in-person staff. Understanding that the vaccine is our most critical tool in protecting us and the communities in which we live from severe COVID-19 illness, hospitalization, and death, the city worked with health agencies to confirm vaccine eligibility for various core actors before vaccinations were open to all adults. We worked with the courts and other system actors to facilitate vaccines to their employees in different ways. I would like to outline now some of the progress that we have made today from a quantitative perspective. But first, I would like to make a vital point. As the mayor has stated since the summer of 2020, in-person court operations are critical to the overall functioning of the criminal justice systems and to the deterrence of violent criminal conduct. Virtual operations are important, and they have sustained us through the difficult days of the pandemic by facilitating some essential functions. But nothing can fully replace in-person operations. To work efficiently and fairly, I state, the adversarial criminal justice system must operate in person. Jurors in grand juries must be able to meet to hear evidence and determine whether criminal charges should be brought. Similarly, the accused is entitled to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury and to be confronted with the witness against him. To protect the due process that our constitutional laws afford to all of us, there is no other way to do this than in person. The courts are now well on their way to being back to full in-person operations, and the city is working with our partners to make sure that the volume of work in all the stages return to pre-pandemic levels this summer. In April 2021, the mayor put forth a comprehensive plan to end gun violence, Safe Summer near NYC, with courts being one of 3 areas of focus along the communities and cops. The city is and will continue to do everything possible to support a fully functional justice system. We are currently seeing some positive trends that show that the criminal process has returned or is fast returning to pre-pandemic levels as the courts continue to increase in-person appearance. I will not read them. They are part of the record. They're part of our dependence testimony that you have. We are also seeing that there is a significant backlog that we believe the full resumption of in-person appearances and consistent system coordination will help to address. Again, please see the appended list of relevant system-wide data on arraignments, indictments, pleas, sentencing, as well as a case backlog and time in custody to measure and to show the signs of progress that we see in the system. I thank you very much for the opportunity to share a small portion of our work during the pandemic, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Director Solar. I'd like to acknowledge that we've also been joined by Councilmember Rosenthal. Director Solar, in dealing with the backlog and in speaking about the backlog, according to data from OCA, there are over 49,000 criminal cases pending in the city's courts. That number isn't terribly unusual, but the number of pending misdemeanors is way down. So the increased backlog is made up largely of felonies. For example, in Manhattan, there are 4,130 pending Supreme Court cases in 2020, as compared to only 3,437 in 2019. Those are the most serious cases for both victims who want to see justice and for defendants who are incarcerated while they wait for trial. What can you tell us about the plan to reduce the backlog?
Thank you. This is a very important question, as you know, and as you have well indicated, when we compare to historical moments, we have seen obviously high numbers, particularly in misdemeanors and also in felonies. For instance, last year prior to the pandemic, we'd have about 15,000 felony cases in the system. Most of them were both indicted and not indicted. Right now we have about 24,000 felonies. What we are doing is the following. Number one is we are working very closely with the courts and with the district attorneys, and they can expand on these, on expanding the number of grand juries. In order to do that, we need to do that creating safe conditions. What we need to do is to find the space and allow us to do that. Social distancing and other measures facilitate vaccinations that I indicated. Grand juries are essential. Right now, we have about 9,500 felony cases that are indicted, but there is a substantial number of them which need to be indicted. I think the number is about 14,000. So certainly our priority is to work with the DAs to make that possible. The other thing that we are working very closely is similarly to make sure that we facilitate trials. The city obviously does not run the process, but works very closely with, again, with course the DAs and defenders to make sure that those trial rooms are up and running. We think is absolutely essential. We saw, for instance, very recently in certain boroughs, and there was limited room, and we worked very effectively, I think, with the courts to make sure that there was an expansion of the number of trial rooms. I also think that it's important that we have agreed with the courts and the defenders as well as the DAs to have in-person operations starting in the next week, and particularly for arraignments and other type of appearances. All of this movement will certainly, my view is, will move cases. As I said before, I think in-person appearances are essential to the resolution of those cases. And obviously, while we will completely respect as the city the decisions made by the district attorneys on how to decide how to move on these cases forward, but we will do everything possible to support them and provide the resources that they might need.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Councilmember Brannan. Director Solar, according to OCA, only 21 jury trials have started this year across all of the city's Supreme Courts. We're going to need a lot more than 21 trials to get through the backlog. So what can you tell us about the plan to speed up the process of getting these trials underway?
Right. So as I was saying during my testimony, we know that trials do not, in any given year, trials do not resolve cases. Most cases are resolved, as you know, through the plea process and other decisions. What we want to make sure, however, is that those trial rooms, as I indicated, are available. So as we increase trial capacity and people are seeing that trials are happening, we believe that will incentivize all parties to address to address, to come to the table and increase the number of pleas. And that's one of the ways in which we can do we will address the backlog. With regards to trials, what I will say is the following. As I said, we identified, for instance, just you have mentioned 21 trials. We identified, for instance, very recently, as I mentioned before, that in one of the counties, there was only one trial room operating. Now we know that we have 4 to 5 trial rooms operated in that county. It's the work that we continue to do, in addition to obviously provide the incentives so cases can be pled out and then people have that incentive. But we will also do, for sure, is to provide all the efforts that, all the resources that the city have to increase that trial capacity. That includes also, of course, to bring more jurors and to bring that. I know Diana wants to add one element of the plan. She is my deputy in charge of this process and can tell you more specific details about what are the plans of the city in this area. Go ahead, Diana.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to make clear that during the height of the pandemic, what the city and OCA worked together to do was to take courtrooms that have historically and pre-pandemic used for trials and use them as grand juries to be able to provide the grand jury rooms to be able to provide the secrecy that grand juries need. However, as we are coming out of the health crisis, we are converting those trial rooms back to their original purpose of trial rooms to expand capacity, working with OCA to identify alternative spaces for grand juries that can still accommodate grand jury members and social distancing. So that is part of the physical interagency operations that we're working with DA's offices, OCA, and DCAS to try and identify space to make sure that we are expanding capacity as the health conditions become better and we are able to do so safely.
Okay, along those lines, Ms. Logan, can you expound on that a little bit for us and give us some more insight as far as the grand juries are concerned, where we are, what the plan of restoration of grand jury assembly is, what that's going to look like, how disassembly maybe of the grand jury have contributed to the backlog or to the jail population itself?
So overall, we know that grand juries, as Director Soler explained, need to be in person. And during the height of the pandemic, grand juries were not able to operate. However, all of the system actors worked together to do preliminary hearings when the health conditions allowed, and then move towards having grand juries operating, albeit at a lower level. So we started slowly to make sure that OCA and all of the court participants were able to adjust to the social distancing, the cleaning routines. DCAS came in and made sure to provide enhanced cleaning measures within the grand jury rooms. And ultimately we moved to having at least 2 grand juries in each borough, with the exception of Staten Island, which has a smaller volume. So they had 1 grand jury operating. And as we are coming out of the health crisis, each one of the boroughs and OCA are working to expand that. So approximately 4 grand juries are operating in the different boroughs. But as you have made very clear, and Director Soler has made clear, the actual volume of cases is larger than the current capacity. And as the health conditions allow, the courts are sending out summonses and impaneling additional grand juries to be able to move forward with the continued in-person operation of courts.
Okay, thank you. And going back to arraignment time and arrests, according to the NYPD, the average arrest to arraignment time in May of 2021 was about 21 hours, down from a May 2020 pandemic high of 23 hours and 23 minutes, but still up from the May 2019 average of 18 hours and 27 minutes. That's the average. So a lot of people are in for a lot longer before they actually see a judge, including a lot of people charged with low-level misdemeanors and cases that can get dismissed right off the bat. How can we get back to that 2019 number? And do you expect the return to in-person arraignments in the next few weeks to help that move along?
Yes, we do. And just to confirm, what we have seen in recent months is an improvement in the key indicators pertaining average arrest time arrest to arraignment times as well as processing times. So right now, the number of the average that we have is about 20 hours per arraignment. We still can do better, as you said, and we will continue to work with the courts, and we think that certainly in-person operations will do. We know that during the pandemic, 95% of cases were arraigned within 36 hours and 66% during within 24 hours. Then those numbers again have increased. We are now up to 97% within 36 hours and 72% within 24 hours. But what we expect to do is to increase certainly to a situation where 99% of the cases are arraigned within at least 36 hours, and 85% of them are arraigned within 24 hours, which is what will allow us to be in that position. We certainly believe that in-person arraignments are going to be important. Again, we have a phase schedule and we have agreed with the courts, with the DAs, with the defenders. It's being implemented over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We think that's absolutely going to be essential and important. And as you said, primarily for the defenders. And certainly, as I stated, we want a safer, but also a fairer system. And part of fairness is to being able to be a speed and a finality to the criminal justice when people have cases.
Okay, I want to touch on bail just a little bit, and then I'm going to get my colleagues in here. Despite bail reform taking effect last January, the rate of bail being set has actually gone up in the last year. Now, I'm sure that a year ago, a lot of judges were more reluctant to send someone to Rikers because of the incredible health risk. So it's understandable that it would have gone up some. But we're now approaching pre-bail reform levels, and that is concerning to me. It's also troubling that more bail is being set in cases that were not affected by bail reform law at all. I know you don't control when bail gets used, but what can you tell us about what you're seeing with respect to how often bail is being set and what impact that may have going forward?
So let me tell you what we do internally, and we'll try to address your question. We regularly track, as you said, we do not control bail, and we want to stay far away from those decisions. Those decisions belong obviously to the court system. What we do is we track every week very closely the bail trends. What we also do is to track very closely the rate at which people are making bail. What we see in particular is that when it comes to violent felony offenders, which is probably what you're seeing, the rates are, as you indicated. We don't see exactly the same rates for non-violent felonies and for misdemeanors. And what we are trying to make sure is that we implement 2 our strategies that we think have been quite successful. One is we continue to educate the judges about the importance of our supervised release. As you know, we implemented supervised release, and we think is a very successful program, initially for misdemeanors and non-violent felonies, but right now supervised release is a strategy that works well also for violent felons. There are obviously some limitations, but to any program, but overall, we are working to continue to expand supervised release, and we have seen increase in those numbers. And the second is to track very closely the difference between making whether or not judges set bail and the ability that people have to make bail. And I think one of the things that we have to be very mindful of is that probably that is the best indicator as to whether or not bail, success with regards to bail reform. Our data indicate that people are making bail at a higher rate after they are set bail than before. But I will definitely discuss this further with my team and report back to you on what we see on these trends. But certainly we are concerned, as you said, about everything that might have an impact in our projections with regards to close Rikers and our efforts to reduce incarceration. So certainly bail is one of the things that we look closely every single week.
Yeah, that's great. And I agree with you. MOCJ has done a great job of creating programs like supervised relief to give judges another option rather than, just setting bail or releasing a defendant on their own recognizance. Is there anything that you may be looking into to give judges another alternative? We know the city has started to use electronic monitoring for the first time recently. Is that something that can possibly be used more often?
Yeah, I will defer to Diana Logan, who runs our electronic monitoring program and can give you the information regarding electronic monitoring. I don't want to provide wrong information. Diana, please, could you address that question?
Absolutely. So yes, Chair, in very lightning speed, the city provided electronic monitoring as a tool back in 2020 and rolled it out through the Sheriff's Department. So the program actually runs out of the Department of Finance, and Sheriff Joseph Facito and his team runs the actual monitoring of individuals that are assigned to an electronic monitoring device. The program has started to see increases. During the pandemic, we had much stricter rules and protocols for who could be on electronic monitoring, and much of that centered around what was considered a stable home life because of some of the limitations with the technology itself, needing a monitor that was affixed in a home that could read the actual bracelet. As we have gotten more experience with it, the sheriff's team has expanded what they are able to do as it relates to making sure they are monitoring individuals that are using additional types of maybe untraditional housing scenarios. And therefore we have seen the program go from having as few as 10 individuals to now having more than 50 individuals that are participating, and the courts have put into the program. We expect to see the courts taking advantage of this tool as well, and all of the tools that the city is providing. We make sure that the courts are aware that we do have supervised release, that there is the electronic monitoring, and we stay in constant contact with OCA to determine if there are any other tools and supports that we as a city can provide.
Okay, thank you. Are there any concerns about widening the process for electronic monitoring at all, or the use?
I'm sorry, Chair Adams, when you say concerns, can you just be a little clearer? What concerns are you worried about?
In looking at the process a step further and stretching it out, net widening the process, are there any concerns about net widening?
So I think, given that the ultimate decision is made by the jurist, meaning the judge, that will sit down and actually write the securing order in terms of what the actual tool is being used for, and when and how, what limitations are put on an individual that is being given electronic monitoring as an alternative, that we at this juncture are comfortable that the courts are using the tool in the way that is consistent with the law. And therefore, at this time, there doesn't seem to be an issue with the net widening, as you say, that the courts are using the tools available to them consistent with what the law has said it's to be used for.
Okay, thank you. Before I pass it on to my colleagues, I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Council Members Holden, and I believe I recognized Council Member Menchaca at the top, but I will recognize Council Member Menchaca again as well. It's on you.
Okay, I will now call on council members in the order they appear in the Zoom, in the order they have used the Zoom raise hand function. If you would like to ask a question, you have not yet used the Zoom raise hand function, please do so now. Council members, you will have a total of 5 minutes to ask your questions and receive an answer from the panelists. The Sergeant at Arms will keep a timer and will let you know that your time is up. Once I've called on you, please wait until the Sergeant has announced before you begin asking your questions. I believe Councilmember Powers will be up first.
I'm beginning.
Thank you, Chair Adams and everyone for being here today. I want to just go into a little bit of data around the shootings, the sort of surge in shootings over the past year, and we've been doing a lot to try to uncover explanations for that. And one of the narratives or explanations we've heard during the pandemic has been the closing of the criminal courts as a reason that could lead to increased shootings. And I think there's been some debate over whether that would be the correct narrative or not. This is for the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. Can you tell us what, if any, impact you believe, to examine that narrative just for a bit, if you can tell us any impact you might believe that the closing of the criminal courts would have or has had, perhaps, on the large increase in shootings in the city over the last calendar year?
So, as you know, and the mayor has stated several times, we face an increase in shootings that has impacted not just, obviously, New York City, but the entire country. It's also an exceptional situation where the profound dislocations of the pandemic are impacting. What I can tell you is what I pretty much believe is happening, and it's important. Deterrence matters when we have certainty of enforcement and we have certainty of a prosecution. So I think very few people will dispute, and you need to have that thing in place in order to deter individuals. Certainly, I think that is more the case when it comes to violence than in any other area. And this is why we see increases in gun violence, but we do not see increases in overall crime. Deterrence, as I said, depends on the certainty of, again, arrest and prosecution. Similarly, there is the need to incapacitate certain folks within certain individuals who are likely to hurt members of the community. And that has also been certainly impacted during the pandemic. Our ability to, with a system where we have much more limited finality and cases could not move as fast, we have some limitations in our ability to incapacitate. I think those two things have changed recently. I think.
Okay. Recently, can I just because I'm using a lot of time here.
Yeah, sorry.
So let me just go back to, it's kind of yes or no. Do you believe the closing of the criminal courts has led to an increase in shootings in the city over the last calendar year?
I think that there are multiple factors. It's not a yes or no. There are multiple factors. And
the question is, do you believe it's part of the equation, I guess?
If I believe it's part of the equation, the answer is yes. It is one part of the equation that we're looking into for the reason.
Okay, and is that because you believe that what I heard is that there's no level of deterrence because there's no finality of the case?
What I believe, as I said, yes, you need to have deterrence in the system, and you have to have incapacitation, and then you have to have finality. Yes.
And for individuals that are caught with caught in a shooting and arrested, are they those individuals would be held in our city jails while they await trial? Is that correct?
No. You asked me for an answer. The answer is depends on the individual. Those are decisions that are made individually by the judge. There are some individuals that will be held. There are some individuals who will not be held. There are some individuals that will receive bail and will make bail. There are other individuals who will be remanded, or some people will be released.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like how much of the impact this closing of the criminal courts has on the shootings. I think the mayor has used that as a explanation, predominant explanation in many of the instances where he's been asked. It strikes me as perhaps a piece of the equation, but it's hard to believe that that's the driving cause of a massive increase in shootings. Can you give us some other maybe explanations or other thoughts on what, since I haven't had a chance to ask you this at other hearings, perhaps we can give us other thoughts as well in terms of what might be leading the increase in gun violence over the past year?
Yes, I think the social and economic dislocations are significant. I think the amount of trauma in the community are significant. Issues of legitimacy and the ability of people to trust the system, willingness to cooperate with the police department and with government in general. Those are all factors that have contributed, I think, to this. And certainly it might be that we see greater potential for interpersonal conflict than we have seen in many decades because of the conditions of the pandemic has impacted us all. We have seen that in shootings, but we have seen in other dynamics so there are multiple theories that we explore, and then we are trying to, to provide evidence for. We believe the court certainly functioning is important. A functioning court system is important to provide the deterrence and incapacitation that I mentioned. Is part of the equation. How much, what percentage, I cannot tell you right now, but it is part of the equation.
Okay, I'll just, my time is run out, but I'll just ask one more question. I did see a chart that Makjid put out, I think it was last year, sort of showing timeline in the increase of shootings and some events that had happened at the same time, when COVID hit, things like that. Has the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice issued any sort of updated information or data sets that might help the council, the public, the press, understand factors leading or factors contributing to it, or whether it's arrest data or other data that might help the public, perhaps? I mean, I think just we're seeing a lot of, everybody's reading the newspapers. I think we're getting lots of questions about what's happening here. We talk about impact of laws, the closing of criminal court, destabilization of COVID. We hear a lot of different theories. Is there anything the Mayor's Office has put out, Criminal Justice has put out, that discusses what is happening right now in the city and provides any data to support any theories of why we're seeing a surge?
The answer is yes, we will share with you some of the updated information that we have posted.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thanks, Chair Adams.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilmember Powers. We'll now turn to Councilmember Holden, followed by Councilmember Rosenthal.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your testimony. I just have a question to follow up on electronic monitoring that the Chair asked. When meeting with the Queens DA, and I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but because I mentioned the same thing about electronic monitoring, couldn't that be expanded? And it seems like the process is that the suspect, let's say the person's arrested, before their court case, or they go home, and then they have to come back once they get approval for electronic monitoring, they have to come back. Is that the process where there's a space in there? There's a time element? It's not done in the courts right away?
It's not done on the day of the arraignment. Hi, good afternoon. Councilmember Holden, it's Deanna Logan. So especially during the height of the pandemic, what happened was the type of electronic monitoring was only what people colloquially refer to as house arrest, meaning that the person was going to be in a home with the bracelet and therefore they wouldn't be able to leave that location. In those cases, individuals were remanded, held in custody, and then the sheriff's team would go and perform whatever the interview was to determine whether the individual was somebody that had the ability to be monitored. Thereafter, they would report back to the courts, and then the courts would make a determination whether or not they agreed that this individual should actually be put on electronic monitoring. Currently, the same type of analysis is done, but obviously the court, depending on the charge, has the ability to remand the person for interview or to let the person remain at liberty and report to the sheriff's office or have a virtual interview with the sheriff's office to have the final determination and information sent to the court as to whether or not the court really wants to use that tool for that individual.
But do you see like a better way to do it? Do you see that maybe this could be done in like one at the court right away and have the electronic monitor in the court? Where like there's an office there. We don't have to have a lull or a few days with figuring this all out.
Absolutely. And as the again, health crisis subsides and there is the ability to have more in person, then we will work with OCA to make sure that we can do that. Right now, space in the courthouses is limited, and therefore the ability for the sheriff and his team to kind of set up shop within the courthouse has been also limited.
Okay. One other question on the shootings that was brought up by Councilmember Powers. When I met with the police commissioner, this was some weeks ago, they said that they're making the arrest. NYPD is making the arrest, but only, I think it was last year, 12% of the suspects caught in a shooting went to jail. And I think this year it's up to 17%. So given New York City's tough gun laws, and I could, this could go to Mark J or it can go to anybody in the DA's offices that are on this, but it seems to me that that's a low number. So are we arresting the same people who are committing these shootings? And if only 17% are so far this year are going to jail, that seems to be a problem. So does anybody have a more updated number of how many people are actually incarcerated, held after a shooting, after they're caught with a gun or in a shooting?
So all right. So I'm not sure exactly what information police department provided. I can tell you the information that we have. I can tell you that the number of people who are the number of people in Rikers in the jail system for murder and attempted murder are up by 48% over the last year. I can tell you that the number of people for gun possession is also up about that 46%, I think is the correct number. So certainly I understand what the police commissioner was indicating. I have not, but again, in my answer to Chair Adams, the decisions
Time.
Yeah, it's freezing. You're freezing up. Do I see everybody see that, or do I just see that?
No. I think we're all seeing that you're.
Yeah, we missed your. We missed your answer.
So sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So what I was saying is that the data that I have is that murders, people accused defendants for murder in Rikers in jail are up.
No, but the question. No, but I'm asking you not about murders or attempted murder. I'm asking you about. Let's say I fire a gun. I don't hit anybody, but I'm firing a gun. What's percentage of those guys or those people that go to jail when you shoot a gun in New York City?
The problem with your question, your question is wrong. What I'm saying is that we don't charge people for shooting. We charge people for either a murder. We charge people for an attempted murder. We charge people with an assault one. We charge
reckless endangerment, whatever charges are charged or go along with firing a gun in New York City. That was the question. Like what percentage of those people are going to jail? Because according to the police department, it's a very low number.
I will follow up with the police department.
Okay.
The numbers, the information that I have is the one I stated.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Next up is Councilmember Rosenthal.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask questions. I guess my question is sort of first, just to sort of observe the previous questions, and what people are searching for is comprehensive data that can help us get to better public laws or policy. I'm wondering if you all are hearing that as well, and what your timing is on getting out the reports that would answer some of these questions.
So what I said is some of these reports are already online. We have released them through the for the last year and most recently. But if there are additional data, we will definitely. We are always planning. We update data regularly. I will check with my team. I'll get back to your office to tell you exactly when is our next report on this issue. I remember that we released something 2 or 3 months ago, but I don't remember right now. When is the next one?
The point just being that, you know, politicians, the NYPD, interested parties are using disparate information or no data to assert things that may or may not be true. And your office could play a critical role, right? So, you know, to Bob Holden's point, wouldn't it be great if we could have some dispositive information answering his concern, which is about people shooting guns and whether or not the criminal justice system is interacting with them, or any system is interacting with them in some way. In my district, it's less about shootings. It's more about people who are repeatedly let out because there's nothing to keep them on, and then causing some physical harm to someone. You know, if we could have real data about that and not just one-off examples, as policymakers, we could all have better answers. So my questions is more centered around a plea for accurate data, because otherwise people are rushing to judgment based on limited information, and it's too important of an issue in a time to drop the ball on that. I mean, so with that, trying to ask a question, are there any barriers to getting information from your office? Are you able to see court data? Are you able to track somebody from arrest to outcome, stuff like that?
So we do not have a significant barriers. What we do is, for instance, to your point, the last report that I was referring about 2 months ago was data pertaining rearrest. That's a report that we have to wait for 2 months. I think it's very informative for the kind of information you're looking for. But we need to wait about a couple of months, yes, because the data is coming. We need to process it and we need to put it out there. And the system in the data is not constantly updated. I agree with you. Data that will allow us to know about gun violence, but also about other felonies and non-violent felonies. So I will check with my team. I mean,
wouldn't it be great if at this hearing you could give some dispositive numbers, right? What percentage of people who have been let out 10 times have now committed, I guess it's called a felony assault? I'm not a lawyer. You know, how many, you know, what percentage of the felony assaults are done by people who've been let out repeatedly, etc. I wish you were able at a hearing like this, and of course with shootings, I just represent the Upper West Side where we're not having that issue, but you know, the same with shootings. Like, y'all should be able to have this information readily available. So the mayor's talking about it, obviously, too.
So I can tell you that the rearrest rates in the city are remarkably stable and have been remarkably stable in recent months. About 30% of people who are involved in the criminal justice system are rearrested at some point within a year. Right now,
is that different than before bail reform?
No, we don't see substantial differences.
So there's no change. So when my when my NYPD, Chair, with your permission, just one more quick second. When my NYPD says at the police council meetings that the reason there's so many people punching people on the street is because people are just let out over and over and over again, so they can't do anything about it. What should they be saying?
I don't know what the PD should be saying. What I am saying is the data is much more complex, obviously, than I presented. The overall numbers do not change. There are changes within categories, and we can discuss, and I will contact your office and everybody else who wants, and most importantly, we put this data publicly to make it available and show in what categories things are different than they were before and which categories things have not changed. But overall,
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, overall when we analyze this data, and as I said, we look regularly, the rearrest rate indicates that numbers have not changed drastically in the last 18 months.
That's incredibly important information. I hope it is shared with the precincts.
And you have a report publicly on my website. If you go to the website, you will see a report already on rearrest information, both historically and what has happened most recently. Yeah.
I urge the NYPD, if you're listening to this, to share that information with your local precincts. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Rosenthal. I'll give any other remaining council members just a minute in case they want to use the Zoom raise hand function. And after that, we will move on to the next panel.
Acknowledging that we've been joined by council members Gibson and Cabrera.
Okay, seeing no hands, so I'll proceed slowly. Thank you very much to the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. We'll now turn to Richmond County District Attorney Michael McMahon.
Thank you so very much, Chair Adams, and all the members of the committee. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'm just going to administer the oath. District Attorney McMahon, could you please raise your right hand? And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and respond to honest city council member questions?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Is my volume okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to once again be before the New York City Council, in particular, the Committee on Public Safety and you, Chairwoman Adams. And to all fellow members, I want to thank council members Miller, Powers, Menchaca, Rosenthal, Brannan, Holden, Gibson, and Cabrera for joining us today. And I also want to thank the delegation from Staten Island, led by Minority Leader Steve Matteo, Councilmember Debbie Rose, and Councilmember Joe Borelli for all the work that they do advocating for the people of Richmond County. I know many of you heard it too often, but as an alum of the New York City Council, I'm honored to be with you, and thank you for all the great work that you do. I also want to thank our partners, those from MACCHE, certainly Marcus and Deanna for the work that they've done to help us get through the COVID crisis, and our partners in delivering justice for the people of Staten Island, the City of New York, the Defense Bar, Legal Aid, the public defenders, the private attorneys, and of course the 18B Council as well. When I last appeared before this council, we were just getting ready to relaunch the first trials again in Richmond County Supreme Court since the onset of the pandemic. And today I can report that we have safely completed 3 felony trials to verdict, and a 4th trial was resolved with a plea during jury selection, and a 5th, a murder trial, is currently underway. So we are, to answer the question posed by the hearing notice in the state of the courts, we are getting away at the Supreme Court level. This was fraught with logistical challenges brought by COVID and its safety precautions, and this was no easy feat. But with determination and collaboration between those many partners that I mentioned and OCA, although I'm with you, Chairwoman Adams, they should have come to this hearing today. And most notably a willing public and those intrepid jurors and grand jurors who showed up to fulfill their civic duty. We are slowly making progress, and this is all made possible by them. That said, trials have yet to resume in the Richmond County Criminal Court. In criminal court, we continue to work with our partners in OCA and the defense part to resolve as many cases possible in the pretrial phase. But to be sure, there are certain cases that do need to proceed to trial, and that's not happening currently. And as we know, there's new state legislation that says in New York City, B misdemeanor cases and unspecified misdemeanor cases will have to have a trial as well. So that clog continues to exist. Like other counties, we have seen an uptick in the backlog of cases and DATs in criminal court in this pandemic, and it presents a difficult task for our office, the court, and the defense bar to work through this in the months ahead. For the DA offices across the city, the challenge of meeting discovery obligations on the unrealistic timeline set by the state legislature in 2019 in the criminal justice reform laws, amid a surge in violent shooting and homicide cases, while also balancing the ballooning backlog of cases, is indeed daunting. The resumption of trials and the full functioning of the courts is the only way to clear some of this backlog. It's not the only way, but it's an important way. And it will take time and resources, particularly personnel resources, to be accomplished fully. As we face the obstacles ahead, our biggest challenge is a fiscal one, created by the administration and the council, and it threatens us with dozens of layoffs and at this worst possible juncture. And to be sure, without financial relief, we cannot meet our criminal justice obligations. And let me explain. At the end of 2019, the city gave the 5 DA's offices and the special narcotics prosecutor money to hire staff and build the infrastructure needed to respond to the new criminal justice reform mandates passed in Albany that went into effect in January 2020. The administration and the council approved and instructed our office to hire expeditiously 61 new positions to meet these demands. At the time, these positions were funded on a pro rata basis for fiscal year 20. In other words, 7 months instead of 12 months for these salaries. It was promised that in the fiscal year 21 adopted, these positions would be fully funded, assuming that we filled the spots by that time. By the spring of 2020, we had hired over 95% of these positions, yet the full funding never promised was delivered. We were told it would come in the adopted, then the November plan, the January plan, and it still never happened. And there's no question that if you believe in criminal justice reform, that these new positions are vital for our agency to fulfill the mandated obligations under the new criminal justice reforms. In fact, in an effort to provide responsible good faith projections as to our needs, we may have underestimated them. But I'm not here to argue at that today. We just want to remind this council that we will not be able to function on the promise of criminal justice reform without help. Over the past year, our office has had to delay start dates, implementing a hiring freeze, and accumulate a significant number of vacancies to avoid layoffs. And looking forward to fiscal year 22, we face a significant personnel budget, a PS budget deficit of approximately $1.5 million because of this unfulfilled promise in funds. Without the funding, we will have layoffs amidst a time of budget increases for the city of New York and a time of great concern about safety on our streets. This depletion in personnel will have a devastating impact on our ability to address case backlog, to meet the discovery mandates of the new criminal justice reforms, and all at a time when we are battling a surge in violent crimes, as we have heard through the questioning of many of your colleagues, Madam Chairwoman, and violent crimes and emerging from the COVID pandemic. Put simply, we cannot continue down this road and ensure public safety in Staten Island if this funding crisis remains unaddressed. And it's not Staten Island only, it is the other 4 offices and the SMP. I implore the council to help our office and all of the prosecutorial offices fulfill the mission we are entrusted to do for our communities and right the wrong in this fiscal year adopted budget. I'd like to now just give you an overview of where we are in our court processes and our numbers. Our grand juries resumed in August 2020 before they were paused due to an uptick in COVID cases. They resumed in January, and we have been operational since. As you heard, we operate 1 grand jury at a time here in Staten Island. As I mentioned, Supreme Court trials resumed in April 2021. All court personnel returned to the courthouse in late May. And currently, as I said, the criminal court inventory in Richmond County is just below 1,700 cases, and there are an additional 800 to 900 unarraigned DATs not reflected in that number. Although at one point during the pandemic, the criminal court inventory of cases that were pending over a year had ballooned to over 200 cases, we have worked with the defense bar and the court to bring that number down to about 130. This is despite not having trials resume in criminal court yet, as I mentioned. There is no tentative plan that we are aware of for trials to resume in criminal court at this time, but our ADAs are all preparing their cases and managing their caseloads as if hearings and trials are moving forward. Our office has worked hard to maintain low arrest to arraignment times, even amid the pandemic. In April 2021, our average arrest to arraignment time was 14.51 hours, 14 hours, 51 minutes, bringing our annual average to just over 16 hours. When I came into office in 2016, Staten Island had one of the worst numbers at over 21 hours, and we've consistently brought that down. And it's something that we're extremely proud of, even amidst the COVID crisis. We have been told that OCA is committed to making virtual appearances a fixture of court proceedings where appropriate. Some of this depends on future executive orders by the governor and modifications to the criminal procedure law. The court has begun in-person appearances for unarraigned DATs on June 1st. Defendants are notified to appear in person in the arraignment part. And our arraignment judge has been calling approximately 25 unarraigned DATs per day. This includes the DATs that have come in during the pandemic, as well as all DATs on the warrants calendar. So as we sit before you today, over a year into readjusting our world to fight a dangerous global pandemic, it goes without saying that this time has been filled with challenges and setbacks. Despite these difficult times, however, I am proud that my office was able to adapt and persevere. We've remained vigilant in our dedication to the rule of law, the protection of victims of crime.
Excuse me, Mr. McMahon.
Yes.
We need to pause for one moment. We're having some technical difficulties. Would you mind just pausing for one moment?
Sure.
Thank you.
How are we looking, guys? Everyone's got tight schedules.
Okay, I believe we've got our technical difficulties worked out and we can resume testimony. Thank you so much for your patience.
So can you hear me now? You can. So did you hear any of my testimony at all? Because I'm told the public didn't. So why?
Would you like to start over from the beginning, Mr. McMahon?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Thank you. Just to make sure we did it all. Thank you.
Very good. So good morning, everyone. It is an honor to appear before the City Council today. And I want to thank the Chair of the Committee of Public Safety, Councilmember Adrian Adams, and the fellow members who are here today, Council Members Miller, Powers, Menchaca, Rosenthal, Brannan, Holden, Gibson, and Cabrera. And I want to thank Speaker Corey Johnson for his leadership in the city. And I also want to thank Staten Island's council delegation, Councilmember Debbie Rose, Minority Leader Steve Matteo, and Councilmember Joe Borelli for their continued ongoing advocacy on behalf of the people of Staten Island. I also want to thank our partners, in particular from MACJ, Marcus Solis and Deanna Logan, as well as the defenders, from Legal Aid here in Staten Island, the 18B attorneys, the private defense bar, for working with us together to get us through the difficulties of the COVID crisis and to start getting our criminal justice system here on Staten Island back on track. When I last appeared before this council, we were just getting ready to relaunch trials again in Richmond County Supreme Court since the onset of the pandemic. Today, Madam Chairwoman, I can report that we have safely completed 3 felony trials to verdict. A 4th trial was resolved with a plea during jury selection, and a 5th, which is a murder trial, is currently underway. Fraught with logistical challenges brought by COVID safety precautions, this was no easy feat. But with determination and collaboration amongst the many partners and the willing public who nobly showed up and performed their civic duty as jurors, this necessary step forward was made possible. That said, trials have yet to resume in Richmond County's criminal court. In criminal court, we continue to work with our partners in OCA and the defense bar to resolve as many of the cases in pre-trial as possible, but we will not be fully back on track until we have trials in criminal court, especially with the advent of the mandate to have jury trials in B misdemeanor and unspecified misdemeanor cases. Like other counties, we have seen an uptick in the backlog of cases and DATs in criminal court amid the pandemic, which presents a difficult task for our office. The court and the defense bar to work through in the months ahead. For DA offices across the city, the challenge of meeting discovery obligations on the unrealistic timeline set by the state legislature in 2019 criminal justice reform laws, amid a surge of violence, in particular in shootings and homicide cases, while also balancing a ballooning backlog of cases, is indeed daunting. And the resumption of trials and the full functioning of the courts is the only way to clear some of this backlog, but will take time and resources, particularly personnel resources, to fully accomplish this. And as we face the obstacles ahead, our biggest challenge is a fiscal one created by the administration and the council, which threatens us with dozens of layoffs at this worst possible juncture. And to be sure, we cannot, without financial relief, meet our obligations under the criminal justice reform law and keep the people of Staten Island and the city of New York safe. So please allow me briefly to explain what I'm referring to. At the end of 2019, the city gave the 5 DA offices and the special narcotics prosecutor money to hire staff and build infrastructure to respond to the new criminal justice reform mandates passed in Albany that went into effect in January 2020. The administration and the council approved and instructed our office to expeditiously hire 61 new positions to meet these demands. At the time, these positions were funded on a pro rata basis for fiscal year 20, and that is 7 months instead of the full 12 months. We were promised that in fiscal year 21, adopted, these positions would be fully funded, assuming that we filled the spots by that point. By spring of 2020, we had hired over 95% of these positions, yet the full funding has never followed. There's no question that these positions are vital for our agency to fulfill our mandated obligations under the new criminal justice reforms. In fact, in an effort to provide responsible, good faith projections as to our needs, we may have underestimated some of these. But we're not here to ask for more. We're simply here to ask that you give us the money promised so that we don't have to run into the possibility of not fulfilling our obligations. Over the past year, we have had to delay start dates, implemented a hiring freeze, and accumulate a significant number of vacancies to avoid layoffs. And looking forward to fiscal year 22, we face a significant PS budget deficit of approximately 1.5 million because of this unfulfilled commitment and gap in funds. Without this funding, we will have to lay off dozens of staff members on top of the unfilled vacancies we have already accumulated. This at a time when the city is facing a public safety crisis, increase in shootings, and we have to now implement all of the criminal justice reforms, discovery reforms, which were on hold pursuant to governor's orders, and now those have been lifted. We are facing a budget and fiscal crisis here in our office, and this is true in the other prosecuting offices as well. So we urge you, please, as you sit down at the budget negotiating table, to simply give us what was promised and allow us to fulfill our mission. That being said, I'd just like to discuss briefly where we are with court operations and how it is affecting our ability to meet our mandates. In Richmond County, grand juries resumed in August of 2020, but they were paused due to an uptick in COVID cases. We resumed in January and have been operational since. Supreme Court trials resumed in April 2021. All court personnel returned to the courthouse in May, and currently the criminal court inventory in Richmond County is just below 1,700 cases, but there are also approximately 800 to 900 unarraigned DATs not reflected in that 1,700 number. Although at one point during the pandemic, the criminal court inventory of cases that were pending over a year old had ballooned to over 200 cases, we have worked with the defense bar and the court and MOCJ to bring that number down to about 130 cases. And this is despite not having trials resume in criminal court yet, as I had mentioned. There's no tentative plan that we are aware of for trials to resume in criminal court at this time, but our ADAs are all preparing their cases and will be ready when necessary. Our offices worked hard to maintain low arrest to arraignment times, even amid the pandemic. In April 2021, our average arrest to arraignment time was 14 hours and 51 minutes, bringing our annual average to just over 16 hours. I'm personally very proud of this because when I came into office, the Staten Island average was over 20 hours, well before the COVID pandemic. We have been told that OCA is committed to making virtual appearances a fixture of court proceedings where appropriate. Some of this depends on future executive orders by the governor and modifications to the criminal procedure law. And lastly, the court began in-person appearances for unarraigned DATs on June 1st. Defendants are notified to appear in person in the arraignment part, and our arraignment judge has been calling about 25 unarraigned DATs per day. And this includes the DATs that come in during the pandemic, as well as all the DATs on the warrants calendar. So as we sit before you today, over a year into readjusting our world to fight a dangerous global pandemic, it goes without saying that this time has been filled with challenges and setbacks. Despite these difficult times, however, I am proud that my office was able to adapt and persevere. We have partnered with the police department and others, as I said, the defense bar, to keep the people of Staten Island as safe as possible. We remain vigilant in our dedication to the rule of law, the protection of victims of crime, and the overall improvement of public safety in our borough. Our staff and ADAs have performed admirably, and I'm very proud of them all. So I thank you for your time and consideration of my testimony. I'd be glad to answer any questions about the subjects of this hearing or any around public safety as you wish.
DA McMahon, it is always a pleasure to see you, sir. And I can't thank you enough for hanging in there with us in spite of the technical difficulties. Your testimony is so heartfelt, and thank you for representing the DAs across the city this morning. You represent them in excellence as always. Your budget plea has not fallen on deaf ears, certainly not by myself, and I certainly feel that your request is most reasonable, and I will do my best to make sure that you, along with your colleagues, are taken care of as far as our budget from the city. We will do our best to fight to maintain and restore that for you. So thank you for bringing that again to my attention. We know that you've been through so much. Your staff has been through so much. What I'd like to know is what coordination have MOCJ, DCAS, and OCA done with your office in terms of the safety of reopening the courthouses and what still needs to be done? And do you have a sense of how your staff feels right now about fully physically returning to the courthouses?
Yep. I think that's a great question, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for hearing our concerns on the budget. As you understand, I'm just trying to get operational. I'm not trying to ask for more. I'm just trying to get because I don't want to do layoffs. This would be a terrible time to do that because of the COVID, the economy, but also public safety. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, as you know, and I'm sure with the council and you hear from members in your district, getting things started again has always been a work in progress, and that's the way it's been here in the courts. But we are very fond, if you will, of the work that we do with MOCJ. They're great people who work there, and they're trying to do their best. And what we've done in our, in the physical space is that all of the courtrooms now are outfitted with plexiglass. The grand jurors and the jurors continue to be separated, and as you heard, using full courtrooms now for the grand jury, limiting access within constitutional bounds to people in the courtroom so that trials can progress. And overall, our people are cautious, nervous, worried, but they're doing their jobs like so many other New Yorkers. They're stepping up and doing what they have to do. There have been some frustrations. As you know from their non-appearance at the hearing today, OCA can be a difficult partner, but somehow we've got great leadership here in Staten Island under Judge Desmond Green, and we are able to get up and running. It's not perfect. Space is always an issue. We don't have enough space for our personnel as it is, but all that being said, I feel confident that if we continue the way we are going, and let's not forget, vaccination is so important. And if we are able to do that, we will get up and running. Big concern is criminal court trials, because as we know, not all cases go to trial. In fact, if it's 10%, it's a lot. But that is sort of what hangs over the criminal procedure process. And if people know there is some sort of end, they make decisions that will allow justice to be delivered in a timely fashion. If there is no end, it can continue forever, whether it's myself, my staff, the defendants, defense counsel, whatever, the courts, they let things linger. And as we know, that's not good for anyone. So we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot more work to do.
Thank you very much. In looking at the jury, how the juries have been going, I went over this a little bit with MOCJ a little while ago. How many grand juries have you actually been able to impanel over the last few months? And are there enough to meet your workload, your backlog?
Yeah, so, and as you heard, our caseload is a lot for a community our size, but it's not, when you compare it to Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan and the Bronx, it's I have to be honest, it's not. So we maintain one full grand jury per month. They meet 11 days out of the month. We'd like to expand that a few days, and that's something we've been working on. But overall, we've been in pretty much normal operations since January 1st. There were fits and starts last year, but we were able in January to start clearing up the backlog of cases that had been sort of stayed because of executive orders. And we are now at a place where we're operating fairly successfully. We never had to, we lost a few grand jurors because of COVID, but since January 1st, we've been doing okay. So we're, thanks, as I said, to the intrepid Staten Islanders who get the call for civic duty and come in, the court personnel, our partners in the defense squad, the police department, everyone, we're doing okay with that. Really, we are no longer in the space that we used to be in. In an office building, we're across the street. They have a full courtroom, sort of a full wing of the old courthouse here in Staten Island that we use for the grand jury now. So as long as we have those space opportunities, I think we'll be okay.
That's to hear. My final question was going to be dealing with the backlog, but it doesn't sound like you've got a backlog right now, which is, or do you?
Yeah, so it's. I'm not going to. I mean, we're okay, in that regard. Again, unindicted felonies. You know, we're working on those numbers. Indicted felonies, getting them resolved or getting them to trial. It's a process that's beginning now, and we're somewhat okay with it. Greatly concerned, as I mentioned, now being able to meet our obligations under the Criminal Justice Reform Act. But I know you hear me on that.
I certainly do. And I will, I'll thank you for your testimony. I'll go to council to see if any of my colleagues have questions at this time.
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands raised at this time, but I'll just remind any other council members to use the Zoom raise hand function. And no hands. Thank you to DA McMahon. We'll now turn to members of the public.
Thank you.
Thank you, DA McMahon.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
We will now turn to public testimony. I'd like to remind everyone that, unlike in our in-person council hearings, we will be calling on individuals one by one to testify. Each panelist will be given 3 minutes to speak. Please begin your testimony once the sergeant has started the timer. Council members who have questions for a particular panelist should use the Zoom raise hand function, and I will call on you in the order you raised your hand after the panelist has completed their testimony. Council members, you will have a total of 5 minutes to ask your questions and receive an answer from the panelists. For panelists, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer, then give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. I'm going to read the first 4 names so that you know who's coming up. Just give me a moment. First up will be Tina Luongo from the Legal Aid Society, followed by Young Mi Lee from Brooklyn Defender Services, Ann Matthews from Bronx Defenders, and Elizabeth Fisher from Neighborhood Defender Services in Harlem. Tina Luongo from Legal Aid.
Time begins.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for holding this very critical hearing at this time, Councilwoman Adams and members of the committee. I'm Tina Longo. I'm the Chief Defender at the Legal Aid Society. It's a citywide public defender, and I'm joined by members of the other defense, our sister organizations. I want to sort of frame out and respond to some of the concerns brought forward in here, particularly around the number of shootings and the reasons why and some of the claims made about the reasons why our city is facing this. There is no doubt that COVID was a pandemic like none other that swept not only our city, our state, but our nation and our world. It left people homeless. It left people unemployed. It abruptly cut critical mental health and medical services. And as we all know, and we must reckon with, it highlighted the disparity to BIPOC communities that existed long before COVID hit us. And it's that backdrop that I sort of want to respond to the rhetoric we have heard through this entire year and a half about the causes of sort of violent crime uptick. And in fact, use some of the data that was presented here about the number of felony matters that are backlogged and the number of arrests that have been made, many of them on violent crimes during this entire year and a half. And to also say that the courts are not reopening. We are resuming in person. In fact, the courts have been open vis-a-vis remotely, and none of us thought that that was actually in the best interest of anybody for public defenders most importantly, our clients who face a tech divide like no other. But the reality of the situation is the uptick of violent crimes isn't because our courts are closed, and it isn't because of bail reform. It is because a pandemic like no other severed the vital needs and traumatized and re-traumatized people in our city. It also sort of raised the disparity of lack of services that we know existed before COVID. And the thing I wanted to talk about as we think about resuming in person is in fact centering the folks who have been in custody, detained and held in our city because of either bail or other holds, and pivot away for a moment about sort of the rhetoric of NYPD with no data and the sort of idea that somehow the answer to all of this is deter people by holding more people in, and talk about the people who have been held in. Because when the governor stopped all of the executive orders, that meant due process to those people who have been in, who haven't had a grand jury as fast as they could have, who are waiting for their discovery. And actually, I want to sort of frame it this way, that the one concern we continue to have as public defenders, and my colleagues will talk about other things, but I want to focus on the health and safety and humanity of the people who are held in custody. Because if the measure of society is how we treat the people who are detained, waiting for arraignments or waiting for their day in court, well, New York City has failed. And DCAS is not here to talk about it. Long before COVID, what we knew is the holding areas of our criminal courts have been a shameful demonstration of the lack of concern that our city sometimes has when they cage BIPOC people who are charged and merely only accused. Poor quality of air, vermin and roach infestation, filth and sometimes human waste, and the outcry of clients to be treated with humanity have long been a problem in our city. So when COVID hit and the public defenders immediately went to the city, March 19th, 2020 was our first letter, we began to push what needed to be done. Better air quality, sanitation, make sure masks happen, social distancing, don't crowd. Month after month after month, we sent reminders, we called to action, we made meetings. The public defenders pushed locally, we pushed OCA, we emailed MOCJ, DCAS, DOC, NYPD. And while Deputy Director Logan did testify that there were remediation, we are still waiting for a full and complete list to ensure that every holding area, every arraignment booth that clients are in and our staff now have to return to have been remediated. Because what we knew from DCAS is the public areas of the courthouses were remediated months and months and months ago. But when we followed up with a question about whether or not the non-public areas where BIPOC communities are held, waiting for their day in court, waiting to be arraigned, we still have not gotten the full list. And we are about to return. So this is not only about public safety, this is about humanity. And I want to frame and reframe the conversation around that as my colleagues from the sister organizations talk about the rest of what needs to happen. Because there is no doubt, and let me be very clear that there's a bit of rhetoric that the public defenders don't want to go back to court. Let me be very clear that we do. We will always stand with our clients. We will always stand with our clients, whether we are standing 1 foot away from them or whether we are in a video. And that is why we need to change this conversation about resuming safely, ensuring that we don't go back to all-purpose parts with 200 people, and most importantly, to have transparent, data-driven, efficient, and effective plans, and that we get communicated those plans, and this council get those plans, and those plans be posted on OCA and MOCJ's website, the same as we post data about how many arrests we have made for violent crimes. That is what I ask that this city turn to as we go back, hopefully to a better, more humane way in which we treat the people that we cage during the pendency of their trials. And with that, I will turn it over to my sisters from the other organizations.
Thank you very much. Next up will be Youngmi Lee from Brooklyn Defender Services, followed by Ann Matthews from Bronx Defenders.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Youngmi Lee, and I'm the legal director in the criminal defense practice at Brooklyn Defender Services. I want to thank the Committee on Public Safety and Chair Adams in particular for inviting us to testify today. I join in my colleagues' testimonies about the resumption of in-person appearances. My testimony today will focus on in-person trials, although my written testimony covers other aspects. The ability to have trials is obviously of paramount importance, but they must occur in person, but not in name only. In-person trials can occur and can be done safely without compromising important constitutional rights, including the rights to effective assistance of counsel, an impartial jury, effective confrontation, public trials, and other due process considerations. The right to an impartial jury includes the right to a fair cross-section of jurors. Given the disparate impact of COVID-19 across the city, let alone the country, we are concerned about the ability to obtain fair cross-sections of jury pools. Courts must be aware of this heightened concern and ensure transparency and the ability to obtain master jury selection lists so that the attorneys can ensure that we are in fact obtaining a fair cross-section. In order to fulfill the right to effective assistance of counsel and the right to confront witnesses, courts must also ensure that courtrooms are large enough to accommodate socially distanced jurors that are sitting, but also to ensure that jurors can see and hear the witnesses. Jurors, as you all know, must make important credibility determinations. If they cannot see the facial expressions or properly hear voice intonations, they cannot fulfill that important duty. Additionally, attorneys must be able to not just view the witnesses, but also to see all the jurors at the same time. Conducting a trial with some jurors looking at the backs of attorneys implicates assistance of counsel rights. This is particularly concerning as we have BDS attorneys on trial right now, where jurors are so spread apart that the attorneys cannot see all the juries all at once at any given time. The right to effective assistance of counsel also means attorneys should have adequate time to communicate with their clients both before and during the trial, inside and outside the courtroom. Discussing the right to testify and then preparing a client to testify is vital to effective representation. As such, incarcerated individuals should never be rushed back to Rikers, nor should they be produced late to court. The right to a public trial also means that the public should be able to hear and see the trial at all times. Family members and loved ones especially should never be excluded from the courtroom. Finally, we understand that there may be enormous pressure to complete a trial and for jurors to render verdicts. Courts must ensure that there is adequate time to deliberate and in a safe place. Coercive charges such as Allen charges should be used sparingly. I want to thank this committee for holding this critical hearing on the court's resumption of in-person appearances. The city must ensure that there is a plan to ensure the safety of all actors in the courtroom, that defenders are made aware of the plan. So far, as of this date, we have not been made aware of these plans to ensure the safety of all participants as we resume in-person criminal court arraignments in early July, and as we have already resumed in-person jury trials. I do want to note that while we are doing this trial, which we started in early June, it's become clear and apparent to us that there has been no guidance given to courts in terms of how to even select juries safely and then to conduct these trials as jurors are spread out throughout the courtroom. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Next up will be Ann Matthews from the Bronx Defenders, followed by Elizabeth Fisher from Neighborhood Defender Services.
Clock is ready.
Good morning. My name is Ann Matthews, and I am the Managing Director of the Criminal Defense Practice at the Bronx Defenders. Thank you, Chair Adams and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. In pre-pandemic times, people charged with criminal offenses would routinely appear in person dozens of times in court before their cases ended. At each appearance, a person could spend hours sitting on hard benches, unable to access phones or even read a newspaper or a book, having taken a day off from work or school, arrange childcare, only to be called and have a court appearance that could easily last less than a minute. In New York's criminal courts, in which the majority of cases are for lower level misdemeanors, the process of court itself has often been the punishment. Now is the time to make good on reimagining the future of New York City's criminal courts and using the lessons learned not only from the past year and a half, but all of the years prior to truly transform the ways in which New York City's criminal courts operate. In effecting that transformation, the experiences, the needs, and the preferences of those appearing in criminal courts, the majority of whom are Black and Brown New Yorkers, must be front and center. New York City's criminal courts have remained open. As my colleagues have said, they have remained open throughout this entire public health crisis and have continued to hear cases throughout that time. But how those cases have been heard has changed dramatically from pre-pandemic times. No longer are our clients appearing in person, but have instead been appearing remotely, virtually, or have even had court appearances excused altogether. It took a deadly global pandemic to demonstrate what many defenders have long been saying. There is no need to force people to appear in person or even at all at most appearances in New York City's criminal courts. In-person appearances should be limited to certain fundamental appearances, arraignments, hearings, and trials, though people should always have the option of appearing in person if they so choose. They should otherwise have the option to appear virtually or simply be excused altogether. All appearances for incarcerated clients should be in person, absent an individual's express request not to be brought to court. Choice and autonomy are critical. The court should prioritize the cases of people in custody and those cases in which real rights, interests, and collateral consequences are at stake. Thank you. Reducing, if I may just complete, reducing the number of required in-person appearances, providing choice and autonomy to those appearing in criminal courts, and prioritizing cases for people in custody are concrete steps towards focusing the limited resources of a court system where they are most needed. And such steps also advance the promise to reimagine the future of the courts and to remedy the current racial and economic inequities so deeply embedded in the current criminal court system. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up will be Elizabeth Fisher.
Good morning. Thank you to the committee for holding this critically important hearing. My name is Elizabeth Fisher and I'm the managing attorney of the criminal defense practice at Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem. I want to join in the concerns and recommendations of my colleagues at the Legal Aid Society, Brooklyn Defender Services, and Bronx Defenders. For our clients, the pandemic has been an incredibly difficult time. For too many, it has meant a denial of due process, additional months living under the burden of criminal charges, and often extended periods incarcerated due to the suspension of speedy trial laws. With all of these consequences for those criminally accused, however, has come one development that could be used to lessen the often catastrophic effects of facing criminal charges on our clients, and that is the creation of a system for virtual appearances in criminal, supreme, and family courts. Even before being convicted, the process of the criminal legal system renders punishment, leaving people in a more precarious position simply by the fact of being accused of a crime. Prior to the pandemic, on an average day, thousands of New Yorkers would wait in packed criminal courtrooms across the boroughs for hours, simply to do things such as get a new court date, nothing more. To avoid the disastrous effects of missing work and school, many people unfortunately choose to plead guilty rather than fight the charges against them. And too often the discussion with our clients about whether to plead guilty is not about whether they actually committed the offense charge, but whether they can afford to miss work or school to fight a case that will likely drag on for months and require dozens of days in court of missed work and missed school. I will never forget one of my very first clients in family court, 13 years old, who decided to plead guilty despite having maintained his innocence because his mom's job told him that if she missed one more day of work to appear in his numerous court appearances, she would lose her job. Our clients should not have to be forced to choose between due process and their families' livelihoods. During the pandemic, the implementation of virtual court appearances when our clients consent has lessened the burden of the process substantially for many of our clients. Instead of waiting for hours in packed courtrooms for a 30-second appearance, they can log into a virtual appearance during a break from work. The use of virtual court with our clients' consent for minor appearances has meant countless hours of productivity has been saved. Thousands of persons have been able to actualize their due process rights without experiencing devastating effects on their careers and educations. While the efforts to create this system were born out of necessity by the pandemic, virtual appearances will be needed by our clients long after the pandemic to preserve their jobs and educations. As the courts return to in-person appearances, we hope that the court will not revert back to business as usual, where our clients must spend endless hours in court waiting for minor appearances that could easily have been completed virtually. We urge the council to encourage and support OCA to implement the permanent use of virtual appearances on consent of our clients to lessen the impact of the criminal legal process as punishment of the accused. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now turn it to the chair for questions, and then we'll resume with the remaining public witnesses.
Yeah, I have to just say, for those of you that have been in oversight hearings with me, it is always so compelling to hear from the defenders. Full disclosure, I have family members who are defenders, and your work, your drive, your passion, for what you do and for your clients always strikes a particular nerve with me. So again, I thank you all for always just pouring out your heart and soul in these hearings, because it's very important that not just my committee hear this, but that the public hear this as well and know what goes on behind the scenes when it comes to our most marginalized communities and the treatment that they get, particularly of concern always with the backroom operations and the conditions, Tina, that you continue to bring out that people don't really see at face value in our courthouses. So thank you for that. And you expounded on the question that I had as far as virtual appearances. And Ms. Fisher, you took it even a step further for me. Young me, you were right in there in the pocket as well in this very important testimony when it comes to the necessity for the option of virtual appearances and what that means and what this pandemic over the past year or so has shown us when it comes to trial, when it comes to compassion, when it comes to humanity, all of those things that need to be taken very, very seriously and moved. I mean, all of that has to be reformed, changed, moved, because things cannot continue to be the way they were pre-pandemic. There is an opportunity for the city to get this right and to change the way that business as usual is handled. So in some ways, we've been brutalized by this pandemic, and in many others, our eyes have been opened to learn how to do things better and how to treat our constituents and our clients better. There is a better way. So just know again that everything that you say always is taken to heart by me. I'm very sensitive when it comes to this issue, these issues, particularly, Tina, of humanity, that you always bring, with such passion before my committee. So I'm so grateful for you for that. I just want to touch on one thing, and maybe Tina, you can expound on this, or anyone really. When we talk about information that's received from MOCJ and DCAS and OCA, how much information have you actually received from these agencies regarding pandemic modifications made to the courthouse? Do you receive them regularly? How frequently are you getting this information? What does that look like?
Thank you very much for sort of wanting more detail on this. We have not gotten regular ongoing information. And we did receive, as I said early, about September, we did receive a full list of the public areas showing that the MERV ratings of all the courthouses, including those family court, criminal court, and some of the housing court, that most of the DCAS controlled spaces public areas were MERV 13 or higher. When we did a follow-up as to the non-public areas, right, the central booking area, the arraignment areas, the holding areas behind the courtrooms where clients are held pre-arraignment, or if bail is set, brought to court from DOC's facilities. We got a bit of a runaround. There was a lot of pointing of fingers. MOCJ has taken the lead. I do appreciate them for trying to get this information, but we even had our CEO be in communication with the General Counsel of DCAS, to which the last information they provided, DCAS provided back, was you have to go to OCA and DOC. It's their controlled facilities, which obviously is an inappropriate response, right? The DCAS are the people who care for those facilities, are in charge of those facilities, and should be coordinating. So we are asking that not only do defenders get that information, but that information be posted, what the remediation was. If a HVAC system could not be brought to a MERV 13, all of the experts say there are remediation measures, standalone HEPA filters that can be used. And what we are asking is that be confirmed, that every area in which we are detaining an individual be remediated, and we be told, and it be posted, more importantly, so that the people who are held also understand that the space that they're in has been remediated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the only other question that I have, and I maybe guess what the answer is, for any of you, do you have any data on longer incarceration terms for clients that are detained pre-trial?
I can speak for Legal Aid Society. Obviously, we know because of the suspension of the executive orders, lack of grand juries, no hearing given trials, that those incarceration rates, those detention rates are in fact longer. And that speedy trial was actually suspended for almost a year, right? Where the governor has lifted that now. And I think that's what DA McMahon is talking about when he says that discovery was going to flow. And I'll turn it over to my other colleagues to sort of talk about that. But obviously, we know that to be true. That being said, we are doing what we can as public defenders to make sure our social workers, our investigators are doing the work to prepare cases, that we are analyzing discovery, that we do receive, and make sure that we are ready. We are advising our clients. We're video conferencing. We're even, in fact, going to Rikers to visit our clients, to prepare for trial and hearing if possible, and when it happens. But obviously, for all the reasons we talked about today, things have in fact been longer for those who are held in.
So at Brooklyn Defender Services, we don't have specific data, but I can tell you that as I work on individual cases with all the criminal defense lawyers, whether it's through writ practice or making bail arguments, it's clear that the executive orders that suspended 3030 and 19080 definitely had an impact on lengthy periods of incarceration. There have been a couple of isolated cases where DOC's failure to produce individuals in court who were scheduled to be released into programs were delayed by a week or so. So there are all different reasons for these really lengthy and unnecessary periods of detention. But in terms of, unfortunately, in terms of specific data, we don't have the hard numbers, but it definitely exists.
And I will just sort of echo Tina and Young Mi here and say, that the concern for our clients who are in custody, many of whom were in custody prior to the pandemic and who literally had their cases in a legal limbo status for close to a year, and for many it continues. It is, we are concerned obviously for the well-being of all of our clients, but it is why we are putting such particular emphasis as we look toward the increased resumption of in-person appearances and especially expanded trial capacity, that we are focusing so much of our interest and attention on the needs of our incarcerated clients and hoping for prioritization within the court system for those individuals for all the reasons that everyone has shared here today in the panel.
So much great information. And again, I want to thank all of you for always, just being, so at the top of your game. It's just unfortunate that, the situation continues. These hearings are going to continue to get this out so that we can continue to partner together to fix this thing. Something's got to give. And unfortunately, I think it's the pandemic that is causing something to finally give. So I thank you all once again for your testimony today, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We will now turn to the remaining public witnesses, who I believe are also public defenders, perhaps testifying in their individual capacities. Next up will be Lisa Oda from the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, followed by Roy Wasserman, who is a senior staff attorney with the Criminal Defense Division of Legal Aid, and Ed Ness. Lisa Oda.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak today on the reopening of criminal courts. My name is Lisa Ota, and I'm the president of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, United Auto Workers Local 2325. ALAA represents over 2,000 public interest attorneys and advocates in the New York City metro area at 20 nonprofit legal service providers. And every day our members fight for justice for poor and low income New Yorkers. Our members include public defenders and staff at the Legal Aid Society, Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem, the Bronx Defenders, and the Queens Defenders. With the imminent reopening of in-person appearances in the criminal courts, I'm here to ask for the committee's support in pressing OCA and other agencies to provide current real-time health and safety information, as well as to use a common sense approach to reopening in-person criminal court proceedings, and to find a way to use this as an opportunity to make significant and lasting changes in how we effectuate justice. Since the COVID-19 outbreak began, we have learned that this is a virus that is most dangerous in crowded, poorly ventilated buildings with inadequate fresh air and air filtration. This is basically a description of our New York City courthouses. To date, we have received no detailed information on mechanical upgrades, testing results, or detailed plans on occupancy limits in specific locations. And yet, in-person arraignments are reopening imminently. Criminal arraignments by their very nature require significant staffing, including court personnel, the NYPD, corrections, prosecutors, interpreters, court reporters, and defense attorneys. For years, our members have been working arraignments in small, crowded, poorly ventilated spaces like interview booths and holding areas, and they're often speaking with multiple people in close proximity for extended periods of time. Moreover, at least one arraignment court used in Queens is particularly noteworthy for being so cramped there is no ability to physically distance. These conditions in these spaces are notoriously filthy, and our members have seen no significant improvements in the courthouses since the beginning of the pandemic. For everyone involved, we must minimize risk as much as possible. ALAA and other legal service providers have been asking for basic information about remediation efforts OCA has undertaken to minimize these risks of transmission of the COVID-19 virus, and to make sure that courthouses are as safe as possible moving forward. Last month, OCA provided a report from AKF Consulting listing 23 recommendations for safety in the New York State courthouses, and a spreadsheet from September listing the MERV filtration ratings in various courts around the city that covered public areas. They've also recently shared a spreadsheet which shows where enhanced air filtration has allegedly been implemented. But to date, OCA, DCAST, and any other government agency has not provided any significant details on the implementation of these recommendations, including areas that will soon be heavily occupied, and this is not acceptable. We are seeking basic assurances and confirmation that OCA has implemented reasonable preventative measures that will ensure the health and safety of everyone who will be required to enter these spaces soon. A report and a few spreadsheets are not enough to rely on. Moreover, it must be noted that AFK did not conduct in-person inspections of the courthouses. And this is why we're asking for a neutral third-party expert to be allowed to inspect these premises and share those results with interested parties. ALA has requested access to the courthouse, in which in-person arrangements will soon begin, to conduct indoor environmental inspections with our expert microecologies. And our experts in health and safety at the UAW and microecologies have examined these reports and agree with the recommendations, but we need to ensure that all of the areas, public and non-public, have been properly remediated. And this is an easy and reasonable solution to the lack of information that has been provided to the public. Being transparent and providing information about the implementation of the government's own expert recommendation serves everyone's interest in ensuring the best possible health and safety conditions in the New York City courthouses. We're asking for real-time sharing of information about remediation efforts, providing regular maintenance records, detailed policies on cleaning protocols, and ensuring that physical distancing and masking policies are being enforced. This will provide our members, clients, court staff, and everyone else the assurances they need to know that New York City courthouses are safe. And on a final note, we must not forget some of the things that we've learned in the past year. This pandemic has given us the unique opportunity to reevaluate how justice is served. Justice is not sitting in the courthouse all day to adjourn a case, causing clients and litigants to miss a day of work or finding themselves unable to obtain childcare. And we appreciate the courts have found ways to work through this pandemic, and we want to partner moving forward to continue using new methods that are working to guarantee access to justice. We are all committed to justice and equality, and by reevaluating how the court does business, we can make steps towards our shared commitment to racial and social justice. Let us use this as an opportunity to make changes we need to balance the scales of justice towards fairness and equity, and let good grow from something so devastating. And I'm here today to offer the union's assistance in this effort and to demand transparency and information about whether recommendations that OCA's own experts have provided have been implemented. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Next up will be Roy Wasserman.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Roy Wasserman. I've been an attorney with the Criminal Defense Division of Legal Aid Society for 34 years. And I want to emphasize some of the points that have been made and give you kind of an on-the-ground view of the problems in the arraignment areas that have been mentioned before. My colleagues and I work 8-hour arraignment shifts 2 to 3 times a month, interviewing clients who have been arrested. We conduct these interviews in booths that are no bigger than broom closets. These rooms are in use 16 to 17 hours a day, 7 days per week, 365 days a year. We speak to each other in private with doors closed. These tiny booths are hidden from the public, tucked behind the courtrooms. These cramped booths contain 2 sides, one for our clients and one for the lawyers. Each side is not much bigger than an airplane bathroom. There's no ventilation, no windows, no filtration in these rooms, and from what I can tell, none in the holding areas where our clients remain for hours. Once in the booths, the interviews can last anywhere from 5 minutes to as long as an hour, depending on a lot of factors. My colleagues have been provided with very little information, as been mentioned. I recently visited these areas. I spoke with NYPD, court officers, and clerks who were present. I was told by NYPD officers that the air on the inmate side of the holding areas is continuously stuffy and not ventilated. That side of the arraignment area is controlled exclusively by NYPD, and is often packed with far too many clients to fit into the cells pre-pandemic. They chuckled at the idea that NYPD would attempt to make these areas COVID safe when I inquired. A court clerk told me that no HEPA filters or local units had been ordered for the holding or interview areas, despite there being ordered for other areas of the courthouse. She also made clear that DCAS is responsible for the area on the lawyer's side of the interview areas, and that NYPD was responsible for the holding areas. MOCJ, in a recent email to defender organizations, indicated that air purifiers are now located in courthouse areas previously identified with ratings below MERV 13 filtration, and they are now opening windows. I saw the opposite. There are no filters in the arraignment, holding, or interview areas, and a court officer made clear to me that all windows had been sealed shut upon an order to seal them shut. There are those who might say that even if courthouse areas are unhealthy, it's okay because vaccinated folks are completely protected and have nothing to fear. Unfortunately, as we all know, many of our clients remain unvaccinated. We have learned that many NYPD and court officers are unvaccinated, and even vaccinated people can be carriers, of course, of the virus, infecting those unvaccinated and immune-compromised family members, clients, and colleagues. Imagine going to a dentist's office that has no ventilation. Even if you were vaccinated, would you feel comfortable going for a teeth cleaning if you knew that for a half hour, you'd be with an unvaccinated hygienist and unvaccinated patients in the reception area? The arraignment interview booth is a professional setting just like a dentist's office. Like patients, clients of ours deserve a safe space to meet with their lawyer and await their arraignment. OCA's own consultant, AKF, which Lisa mentioned earlier, reported to the chief judge recently that buildings where MERV 13 filtration cannot be upgraded should be provided with local recirculating units with high efficiency filters, or HEPA. That same consultant recommends that local filtration devices with UV capability be provided to spaces that don't have or can't have MERV 13 filtration. The report said that those spaces include meeting rooms, large conference rooms, and bathrooms. The report stated, quote, "These units increase the air circulation rates in an area where multiple people may be meeting," unquote. That precisely describes the arraignment booths. With in-person arraignments on the verge of returning, we need an outside consultant like microecologies to examine the arraignment, holding, and interview areas to determine if the airflow meets safety guidelines. If they don't, then we need to upgrade these hidden areas with HEPA filters and anything else recommended by the court's own consultant. And finally, I just want to emphasize, again, as a lawyer on the ground who works there every day, what two of my colleagues mentioned about the revolution of virtual appearances for a client as an equity issue can't be overemphasized. I've had clients appearing in court while taking a break from work, or even I've had one client who was chopping vegetables in the back of a restaurant and didn't have to miss even cutting a carrot in order to appear for 10 seconds in court. That same client not only would have missed that day, but possibly could have been fired for missing work. And all of us can give you tons of examples of clients who didn't have to find childcare, elder care, miss work, get fired because of the revolution of virtual appearance and time certain slots. Even if for those cases that return to in-person, we need for our clients and us to have the respect of giving a time certain, not for hundreds of people to have to show up at 9:30 in the morning and wait all day. The time certain and the virtual appearance has literally been a revolution in the process of the criminal courts so that the process is not the punishment. And I want to thank you again.
Thank you, Roy. Nice to see you. Next up will be Etta Ness.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I want to echo what Mr. Wasserman just said. I've been a public defense lawyer for many, many years. I also worked in the probation department as a social worker before that. So I've been working in the system for well over 30 years. I think it cannot be underestimated how much bias affects everything in the system. From the time that the police choose to arrest somebody, from the way a prosecutor chooses to write up a case. I think it's difficult for many people to step into other people's shoes and see the circumstances that they have to experience. It's easier not to talk about it or to deny that there are unsafe conditions in the courthouse and how we don't ensure that the cells and the spaces where people are locked up are safe. The judges sit not that far away, actually, in the arraignment part, but they sit high up on a bench from where our clients are kept in the back. But there's such a wide chasm between the two places where people are kept. Our clients are not kept in safe spaces. They're crowded, they're dirty, the cells in the back, they're filthy. Just because someone's arrested doesn't mean they should be treated in a way that's not humane. They shouldn't be treated as someone that's less than. As defense lawyers, we go in the back so we're able to see the conditions and we experience them ourselves, but not in the same way that our clients have to. They're kept up to 24 hours before they're able to see a judge. They're kept in situations in the cells where they're dirty, where they're open to getting infectious diseases. There should definitely be portable air filters, filter systems put there in the back. They're not there. It seems like very little has changed in all this time. It's been so many months since the pandemic started. It's only brought out the stark reality, the fact that of the unhealthy spaces there, because before COVID, the spaces were filthy, they were not cleaned properly. And even more so now that this pandemic has occurred, nothing has been remedied there. Really, it's essentially the same. So really what I wanted to express in terms of reacting to what other council people had said that I heard Ms. Rosenthal say, I think people are not focused enough on the fact that we need more community resources to help people in the communities. I mean, it's a fact that it's poor people and Black and brown people who are being locked up in a disparate way in our system. So there's no reason that we shouldn't be discussing, when we're talking about reopening the courts, we should be discussing about the fact that there aren't enough community resources being given to people. Again, this has been brought out very starkly this past year during the pandemic, when we see all the people who are on the street suffering, whether it's through mental illness and other things, and they are not being given the community resources they need. We have so many teenagers who come through the systems, and yet we don't have enough youth programs and community resources put into those to help people. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then we focus after the fact, and people will say, well, let's just lock people up again and again. I mean, the fact is the bail reform system was created in part because wealthy people can afford to pay bail. So poor people should not be stuck in jail because they don't have the resources. Yeah, I just want to say taxpayers, we spend so much money as taxpayers in terms of incarcerating people, in terms of who the prosecutors choose to write up complaints against. It doesn't make any sense for that money not to be put into community resources. And thank you to this city council for holding this hearing.
Thank you very much. That is the last witness that we have registered to testify who appears to be logged on, but I will pause for one moment. If anybody else wishes to testify, please use the Zoom raise hand function. Okay, seeing no hands, I'll turn it back to the chair for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Council. As we have come to the close of this hearing, I'm sure that we see that there are so many areas that need to be repaired within this system. If we're looking for true justice across the board, there must be justice in our court, the place where justice is supposed to take place for all people. What we continue to learn is that there is just a plethora of inequity in our system that must be addressed. It must be taken seriously, and it must be reformed. So that said, I would like to thank Mock J, D.A. McMahon, defenders, members of the public, of course, all of my colleagues on this committee, Council Daniel Addis and Max Campner-Williams, for all of their hard work on putting this committee hearing together and making this hearing possible. With that, this committee meeting is adjourned.
Okay, we have ended the live. Thank you, everyone.